Assalamu alaikum, my dear colleagues, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening and warm welcome. Let me first introduce myself. My name is Dr. Sana Shahid, and I'm currently associated with Sindh Madarsatul Islam University as assistant professor. I'm also working as associate editor in JOSM's Research Journal of Media and Communication Studies Department. So I'm grateful for the presence of so many of you here today, and I would also like to thank SMUTA. I understand that it is not a piece of cake to arrange these kind of informative webinars, and despite the heavy responsibilities of regular jobs. So I'm grateful for the hard work and dedication of all the team members, and I'm also delighted to welcome Dr. Vasil Shea, our special guest here today. It's my great honor and pleasure to introduce her. She's an enthusiastic, creative, and senior qualitative expert, having more than 13 years of experience with a broad and acute interest in citizenship, representation of gender and identity in curriculum subjects. She received her PhD in English in Education from the University of York, England. She is currently serving as an assistant professor at Institute of English Language and Literature, University of Sindh, Jamshoro. She has many research papers and publications to her credit in reputed national and international journals and attended many workshops, symposiums, and conferences. This webinar is a part of series related qualitative research. As we all know that the first session of Dr. Vasil was on data collection in qualitative research, such as in-depth interviews and focus groups. In this webinar, she is going to discuss data analysis techniques in qualitative research. As we all know, that qualitative research is very important in educational research, as it addresses the how and why research questions and enables deeper understanding of experiences, phenomena, and context. We will discuss what techniques of analysis will be best for any specific method of qualitative research. Let me share that a recorded version of this webinar will be available in the end of the webinar. I would also like to mention that participants are suggested to ask questions in the end of the webinar. So this is all from me, and now I am handing over to my respected guest, Dr. Vasil Shea. Please, madam.
Thank you so much, Sana. Thank you for the detailed introduction. Good evening, everybody. We are going to talk about qualitative data analysis today. I would like to share my screen with you guys. Okay. All right. So, no. Just give me a moment.
Sure, madam.
That's not the file I wanted to share.
It's okay. Take your time, please.
Right. So we're going to talk about qualitative data analysis today, and we will discuss an introduction to qualitative data analysis. Then we'll talk about coding, and then we will talk about types and steps of qualitative data analysis. We will discuss some practicalities of coding, and then I'll be talking to you about presenting qualitative analysis in your findings and discussion, how exactly to write it. Right, so let's start with the introduction. Why should you use qualitative methodology? Those of you who are here and watching us, I would like you to please comment on the Facebook link, and I can read your comments. Why should we use qualitative methodology? What is qualitative research useful for? What are your views? Any comments on that are welcome. And then I'll tell you my views on it as well. Those of you who attended the last workshop would hopefully know why we should use qualitative methodology, because we discussed that last time. I understand that sometimes it takes people some time to start talking. So I try to start my audience for talking at the very beginning as well.
Yes, I guess maybe people are joining.
Yeah, yeah. We can wait a couple of minutes and see what people say.
Okay, I guess that would be great. Well, we have a comment for deeper understanding.
All right. So Kiran says we use qualitative methodology for deeper understanding. Yes, because we have very rich data in qualitative research, so it helps us towards a deeper understanding. Sana, your research was qualitative or quantitative?
Well, it was a mixed method research, and I choose both quantitative and qualitative research
All
for
right.
my research project.
Right. Kiran has put another comment. She says, for clearer and in-depth analysis as well, we use qualitative research. That's right. Right. So we use the qualitative data because it brings us rich data. It gives a holistic picture of what you're observing, so everything can be seen in its context, right? It lets you observe or study the context in its natural environment. So, say, for example, if you're doing an observation in a classroom, in a school, you're observing those people in their natural environment. So, that's also a benefit of qualitative research. Right. How do we decide whether we should do qualitative research or we should do quantitative or mixed methods for that matter? So we try and do qualitative research when we're exploring a new phenomena, right? Um, not much research is present on that area. You want to explore something that's relatively new, okay? When you wish to explore phenomena that are measured using qualitative instruments like perceptions, opinions, views of people regarding something would be usually measured through interviews, and these are mostly semi-structured interviews. So when you collect data qualitatively, then obviously you're going to analyze it qualitatively as well. Your literature review should help you in figuring this out. When you read about other studies on the topic, you see how exactly those studies have been done, what kind of methodologies have been followed in those studies. So that's an important part of choosing your methodology. We need to think about the other studies and their methodologies before we start our own research on the given area. You must design your questions accordingly and choose your instrument accordingly. So I think I discussed this in the last session as well, that when you start your qualitative research and somebody reads your questions, it should be clear from your question whether this is going to be a qualitative research or a quantitative research. So you have to choose your instruments according to your research question, and that would determine whether this is going to be a qualitative data analysis or a quantitative data analysis. Moving on, types of qualitative data. There are a lot of different types of data. It could be a written text, it could be documents. Say, for example, if you're analyzing policy, then you would be analyzing policy documents. You could be doing an analysis of interview data, so it could be interview transcripts. Qualitative data also includes images and videos sometimes. Some people take images, some people take videos during observations, and they analyze them as well. I myself, along with a colleague of mine, have done a pictorial analysis of textbooks. So we looked at all the pictures in the textbooks of primary school, because in primary schools, language books, there were a lot of pictures. So we analyzed that from a gender perspective. So it's possible to do qualitative data analysis of images and videos as well. Field notes of observation, that's also qualitative data. If you've observed notes if you've observed in the field and you've taken notes during that, that's your qualitative data that can be analyzed. So all types of data can be analyzed. It's not necessary that you should always have written documents. It's possible to analyze audios, videos, and images as well. Now, the first and foremost thing that you should know about qualitative data analysis is that you have to file and sort everything properly. I always compare it with a librarian. So a qualitative researcher is like a librarian. You need to file your data in a manner that you can find it again. If you go to a proper library where there are numbers on all books, then just by those numbers, the librarian can tell you which book is where. So you should be like that as a qualitative researcher. You should name your data in such a way that you can go to that file and open it immediately from the file name. You need basic information about each set of data. So if you have student interviews as well as teachers interviews as well as observation notes, then in your data folder, there should be 3 folders with students, teachers, and observations as their names. So the basic information about each set of data should be there in the name. Within the students, if it's important to you to know the name of the student, then that should be there. If you are defining them according to their locality or their um, background or age or gender, then you should file it according to that. So the basic information that's important to you for each set of data should be in there. Example, if for interview transcripts, you can have date and the name of the interviewee. For observations, you could have date and time plus location. So you should have the basic information for each set of data within the file's name. Like a librarian, you need to understand a little about the documents to arrange them logically, right? So there should be that basic information there in the file name, so you know the logic behind that, that saving of your documents. This is same for literature review as well. When you download articles for your research, how do you save them? What kind of method do you use to save your literature review? Have you ever tried to save the articles with a different name from the one with they are downloaded, or do you always save it as it is? Let's see if we get any response in the comments.
Well, I guess we can download some stuff in Excel sheet and then categorize it accordingly. We can also create a metrics-like document.
Yeah, definitely. I actually was asking about the file name. So when you save those articles on your device, what do you keep as the file's name?
Well,
the name
be,
of
I
the
guess, exactly. It should be, I guess, the main title of our research work.
Yeah. That's one possibility. If you save it as the title, maybe that will help you search it later.
Exactly.
What else? What else could we do? We could also save it with the name of the author and the year, along with a little bit of the title, because when we are using in-text citations, we're usually using the name of the author and the year.
We can also assign codes as well, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. All right. So moving on, qualitative data analysis. Let's see what we need to do. Like imagine you have 20 10-page transcripts as your data. It's a huge amount of data. You wouldn't know what to do with them. Cohen and his colleagues say that the researcher needs to do one or more of the following. You could either describe, or you could portray, or you could summarize, or interpret, or discover patterns. These are some of the things that you could do with qualitative data. You could either just fully describe it, or you could summarize, or you could make sense of what it's saying and interpret and see whether there are any patterns or themes in it. All right. These are things that we would be talking about in detail in the rest of the webinar as well. So we need to find a way to bring together all the data and write about it. That's the key thing. We need to find a way to concisely report our data, right? That's what we want to do. We want to answer our research question, and we want to do it through this vast amount of data that we have, but in a manner that is readable and understandable for our audience, whoever that might be. So we need to find a way to bring a large amount of data together and present it. That's exactly what we are going to try and learn today. So what's a practical way forward? What exactly can you do? It's very important that you should know your data. Read your data, transcribe it, go through it again and again so that you are completely familiar with it. Okay, that's the first step for your qualitative data analysis. Sometimes we get other people to transcribe the data for us, expert researchers, especially those in full-time jobs. They don't necessarily have the time to do the transcriptions themselves, especially if you have funding. You would get somebody to do it. But then it's your job to read the data and go through it again and again so that you're completely familiar with it. Okay, that's the first step of any data analysis. You should be familiar with your data. While you're reading your data, you could write some memos. You could write some reminders to yourself. Whatever you're thinking about the data, you could write that down, and these notes can prove helpful later. We will talk about that in further detail. Coding is a very, very important step of qualitative data analysis. It's like naming the data. You start to give topics to your whole data so you can organize it better. This is something that we will discuss in detail. And this is something that is involved in most qualitative data analysis. If you learn to code, then hopefully you would learn to present your qualitative data analysis. Another thing that people might find useful is concept mapping or flowcharts. Sometimes it helps to make concept maps. Memos are like this, sticky notes that you could put on your data so that when you go through your data later, you would remember it. These are just notes to yourself. Any kind of comment on your data, it's often linked to your codes, but not necessarily. So say, for example, if you're reading your data and you realize that this person said this sarcastically and they had a sarcastic smile on their face when they were saying it, you could write that down in a memo and you could save it. So that will help you in your analysis later because you would know that they were not actually meaning what they said. So things like that, note on the body language, something that you recall, or some maybe you remember a link to this article that you read the other day and you want to write it down before you forget. So that's also something that you could do. So memos are really useful. Just write things down. We tend to rely a lot on our memories, but our memories are not really that good. So sometimes we think that this is something I'll remember, but you may not. So don't trust your memory so much. Put the memos there so that you will remember it later as well. These are the concept maps I was talking about. So there's a key concept which is linked to some general concepts, and there are some cross links. And this could be a way of analyzing data with a pictorial representation, with a graph. Some people like to visualize things like that. Graphic representation that can be a link between your codes, or it could be a link between concepts that you've studied. It can help to start you thinking about links in your data. It's very important in qualitative data to see what are the links. So are the people from urban background saying something different? Are the people from rural background saying something different? So if you can see those kind of links in your data early on, it might be useful to put it in a flowchart or a concept map so that it can be used later. All right. Moving on to the next part of our webinar, types and steps of qualitative data analysis. Now, there are many types of qualitative data analysis. There are no agreed conventions. It's not necessary that everybody should agree on these things. Some people take life history interviews, so they analyze each interview separately. Some people do cross-sectional research, so the data collected at one point in time is analyzed separately, and the data collected at another point in time is analyzed separately. Some people do longitudinal research, and they compare the data across different time points. So there are different types of qualitative data analysis. Some very popular ones include grounded theory. Grounded theory is a complex methodology. It's not advised for novice researchers, of course, because Grounded theory is the kind of methodology, kind of qualitative data analysis in which you discover or construct theory from data through the process of coding. Okay, it's done in research areas where already existing theory is lacking. So there is no already existing theory. You try and come up with a theory through your data. All right. Um, Obviously, the same process of coding and discovering patterns is used in grounded theory as well. That we will talk about in detail. But the important thing, the key point in grounded theory is that it's a process in which we discover or construct theory from the data. Another one is critical discourse analysis. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of critical discourse analysis. Can you think of any models of critical discourse analysis, any writers of critical discourse analysis? If so, you can put it in the comments. What is critical discourse analysis? It's a qualitative analytical approach, all right? So it's a methodology of qualitative data analysis, which looks at discourse, which looks at language as a form of medium, and it sees how language is used to describe, interpret, or explain certain concepts. Okay, I have put a definition here by Millet, 2018. I've put a reference to that in my last slide, so you can take a look at it if you're interested in critical discourse analysis. A lot of models are followed in critical discourse analysis. I hear that Fairclaugh's model is very common, is very popular. And another very most common, one of the most common methods of qualitative data analysis is the process of identifying patterns or themes within qualitative data, which we call thematic analysis. Okay. Thematic analysis is something that a lot of people use, and I have used a lot of times in my research as well. Virginia Braun and Clark have given a model of thematic analysis, even though they are from nursing, but the field of nursing, but their model has been used in a lot of different fields, in literature, in education, in management. So it's not necessary that if the researchers are from a different field, you cannot use their model in your own field. As long as it's applicable, you can do it. What they have suggested are 6 steps of analyzing interview transcripts. Even though they are basically talking about interview transcripts, but this is applicable to all qualitative data. It's not necessary that you should do it only with interview transcripts. Any text, be it textbooks or some policy documents or curriculum, you can analyze it through this qualitative data analysis method, which is thematic analysis by Braun and Clark. What they say is a step-by-step procedure. The first step is familiarizing yourself with your data. So when you read data, when you transcribe it, you become very familiar with it. And that's when you have achieved the first step of analysis. Your analysis already start when you start reading your data. The second one is generating initial codes. So you start looking at your data and you start giving titles to the data. Wherever you read a theme, wherever you read, you decide what this is about and you give it that name. That naming procedure is coding. Once you have coded your data, you revise your codes, you go through them again and again, and once you've coded all the data, you search for themes. What are themes? Themes are like patterns. Say, for example, if you've got a number of codes, and a lot of people are talking about, if you're researching on readers' perceptions in relation to existentialism in Waiting for Godot. I'm from literature, so those are the kind of examples I know. So readers' perceptions in relation to Waiting for Godot regarding existentialism. There are a lot of codes that you have. They're talking about meaninglessness. They're talking about losing their identity while reading the novel, they're talking about nothingness. And you see that those people who are talking about meaninglessness are all from very educated families. Say, for example, just making an assumption, and those who are trying to give meaning are not necessarily from the same kind of background. So you see that pattern in your data, and that's the kind of theme that you have taken from your data. All right, I'll give more examples of this later. You review your themes in the first step, then you name your themes, you give them headings, and you write the report. The report is your thesis, your article, whatever it is that you are working on. So these are the main steps. You familiarize yourself with the data, you code it, and you search for themes, and then you define and name those themes and produce the report. Let's get into the detail of coding. What exactly is coding? Please go through the slide while I drink some water. I'll let you go through it. So list of codes are like a book index, all right? It helps you to find things. So what we're trying to do basically is we're trying to organize our data in a way that we are able to present it later. What you are doing is when you read your data, you give it a name or a topic to all extracts from your data. The purpose is to categorize similar things across interviews, and it helps to draw out common themes across interviews. Kiran had put a comment about trustworthiness and reliability in qualitative research. During the process of coding, it's useful to ask someone to code a bit of your data to check trustworthiness of your coding. It's very important to get somebody, another researcher, to code a bit of your data. You give them a bit, one part of your transcript, and you give them the list of your codes, and you ask them to code, and your coding should match. If it doesn't match, then you need to revisit your coding. This increases the trustworthiness of your data. So what is the purpose of coding? It is to categorize similar things across interviews. It helps to draw out common themes across interviews. So, example, how teachers discuss dealing with bad behavior. So wherever the code bad behavior comes, you look at that data and you're able to see what teachers are discussing. A lot of people ask how many codes. So how many codes should we have in our data? Well, there is no specific number, okay? How do you decide when to stop? It's very difficult to find a point of saturation in coding. Usually we say that when you're collecting data, when you reach saturation, then you should stop collecting more when the same thing is being repeated. But with coding, the thing is, you code your first transcript or your first document or whatever it is that you are coding. When you're done with coding the first one, depends on however many topics your participants are talking about or your document is contains, right? So when everything is coded, you'll use that list of codes to code your second document or your second transcript. You repeat the procedure with all your data sets, and then you review your codes. You might find that some of the codes are similar. You might want to delete some. You might want to add some. You might want to put some together as parent codes and child codes. So it's a subjective process. It's up to the researcher to make informed decisions regarding it. Okay. So as many topics are being discussed in your data, you're going to have as many codes. There is no specific number. When should you finish? If you have reviewed your codes twice, that's okay. You need to move on now. Okay. So you coded once, you revised them once, you revised them again. I think that's enough. I'm doing currently a project with colleagues from University of York and University of Bergen, um, Western Norway University, and we are on our fifth round of coding at the moment. So sometimes it takes a lot of time. We change our codes, we revise our codes, and we find that we still need to go on. So again, it's a subjective decision. You need to decide once you are once your coding aligns with your data and you're satisfied with the results, and you feel like you've come up with certain themes that you can now present in your analysis, then that's the point where you should finish. This is an interview transcript, and these are the codes. So if you go through the first part, you would see what I have coded it as, and you can see how the coding process is done. Please go through the highlighted part and the corresponding codes. So in this part of the transcript, the participant is talking about using group activities and lectures. So this has been coded as mixed strategies, and then the strategies are named. Now, what happens when I code it like this? I see mixed strategies anywhere in my data, and I write that against this code. This helps me see how many teachers talked about using mixed strategies in a large class. So this process of naming the data or coding the data helps me organize my data and identify any themes or patterns within it so that I can report on them in my analysis, in my findings and discussion. This is how coding works in qualitative research. I find this model useful sometimes as well for the students, a visual model of the coding process in qualitative research. So first of all, you have many pages of text, right? Initially, you read through the data and you divide it into segments of information. You start labeling those segments of information with codes. So maybe you come up with 30 to 40 codes. Then you reduce and overlap the redundancy of codes. Sometimes you see that you have coded the same thing twice, or you've named it differently, but it means the same thing. So it sort of reduces to around 20 codes. This is just a rough estimate that Pearson has given. Then you collapse the codes into themes. So you find out patterns and you reduce those 20 codes into 5 to 7 themes, which you can write about in your analysis. Okay. This is from Creswell, and I hope that this pictorial representation of the coding process helps you understand what goes on in qualitative research. These are some of the resources that you could use to learn more about coding process. I find it very useful, at least in your first project, if you're doing your PhD or your MPhil, or it's a very big project, then you should have a handbook with you, a source book that you can use. Miles and Huberman, the first one, Qualitative Data
Sorry,
Analysis.
madam, I want to interrupt. Your slides are not changing, so is it any error or it's still on first slide?
Really? I've been going on
Yes.
for so long. Why didn't you tell me before?
I thought that you have not changed it intentionally.
Okay. Um, does it show the resources you can use at the moment?
Yes, yes, we can see now.
That's unfortunate. I was showing this visual model before.
Well, it's okay, but you are explaining everything in a very detailed manner, so it's okay.
Okay. All right. So this was scientific transcript that I was showing, and it was these are the codes that were given to it, and this was the visual model of coding that I was earlier talking about. So your codes, you start with many pages of text, and you move on to 30 to 40 codes, and then you reduce it and come up with themes. So these are the resources that you could use. You could you could look at Miles and Huberman's Qualitative Data Analysis, which is an expanded source book. And it tells a step-by-step procedure of qualitative data analysis. I also found Richard's book very interesting. It's a user's guide to qualitative methods. He talks about topical coding and then critical coding, analytical coding. And obviously, Braun and Clark's thematic analysis in psychology. Sorry, I said nursing, but it's psychology. This is also a very useful resource for learning to code. And now, practicalities of coding. When we talk about coding, how exactly are you going to do it when you have your data in your hands? What exactly are you going to do? You could use paper, you could use highlighters, you could use Microsoft Word, and you could cut and paste as many times as you like. Software, you could use software. It doesn't analyze, but it helps you organize. So first traditional method is highlighters. So say, for example, in this transcript, you can see 2-3 colors, and the green stands for personal life, yellow stands for general election, and blue stands for the day job. So what's the problem with the highlighter method? What if you want to code the same piece of text in 2 or more ways? If you want to code it in more than one way, then you cannot do that. What if you have 35 codes? How many colors are you going to use? If you want to compile text for a single code, how will you do that? So it gets a bit difficult, right? If you are cutting and pasting on paper, it sometimes becomes very easy to do multiple codes. You can compile it quickly, but obviously it's messy and it's not readily searchable, and you lose the context of the code. So what's the solution? You could do it in Microsoft Word. That's the solution that is most feasible for us at this stage, because qualitative data analysis softwares are there, but they're very expensive and they're not available freely, okay? You use the highlight function in Microsoft Word. You can use the comment function. You can cut and paste without scissors and glue. You can search for a word or phrase. So a lot of problems are solved in Microsoft Word. But still, there are a number of issues. You still can't have 2 or more colors, but if you highlight it and if you code it with a comment, you can put as many comments as you like. So you can do that. It's still not designed for coding. Okay, it's not suitable for coding as much as qualitative data analysis softwares, obviously. CAQDAS, Computer Assisted Qualitative Data Analysis. It can mean the method or the software. It's now a very common means of analyzing large volumes of qualitative data. I used a software in my PhD research as well. In qualitative data analysis softwares, you can analyze text as well as audio, video, still pictures. So it's possible to analyze different types of qualitative data. There are various applications that you could use. Nvivo was the one that I used in my PhD. Atlas T is also similar to Nvivo. There are a lot of others: MaxQDA, Ethnograph, Hyper Research, N6, ELIN. These are some of the types that can be used in qualitative data analysis. This is what Nvivo looks like. I feel that it's very easy to organize codes because it's especially designed for the coding process. So if you see that this option here, nodes, you can, on the left tab here, If you click on that, all the codes come up. If you click on any code, all the data that is coded under that code comes up. And you can print that summary, or you can save it in Microsoft Word. So it's very easy to see all your data under codes, under an assigned code. So since it's especially designed for the process of coding, you can do a lot of things with it. You can make some flowcharts, you can make word maps, and all those options are there in Nvivo. You can make queries, you can make reports. So it's very feasible, and it's if you have access to it, it's a great organizer. But we should remember that in qualitative data analysis, the software doesn't do the analysis. It's just an organizer. It only helps us organize the data. So you can report it later very easily, but the analysis is still done by the researcher themselves. Okay. Reporting qualitative data analysis. How exactly do you write your data analysis? What exactly are you going to do in your data analysis? Well, we have to find similar codes and form categories. Sometimes they call it categories, sometimes they call it tree codes, sometimes they call it parent codes. So terminologies differ, but it's like if you're talking about education, rural urban background, family life, they can all come under one broad code, personal information. Okay, so you're forming categories from codes. You're putting it under one heading. Okay, these categories can then help you develop themes. Say, for example, if you have codes of caste identity, societal impact, if you studied those, and you formed themes related to that students relate to caste identity in God of Small Things. This is from my own research. I was doing research on students' perceptions of identity in relation to a novel, The God of Small Things. When I coded it, I saw that there was caste identity within readers' perceptions, and I saw that they also talked about societal impact. So I looked at it and I formed this theme that students relate to caste identity in The God of Small Things. They see a personal connection. How did I present that in my thesis? I looked at the data and I saw these codes. So I saw that students were relating to identity in The God of Small Things. 7 of them talked about it 9 times. So those who related to religious identity were 4. Those who related to caste issues were 3. What I have done is I have put the number of participants who talked about this theme, and I have put a table of codes in my findings as well. And then in later paragraphs, I explain these codes. So sometimes the students ask me whether we should give the codes in the thesis, or are they just for our own sake? It's up to you. You decide whether it will be useful for your reader to see the codes in your thesis or in your article, or you think that it would be something that you use only for yourself and you can just explain it in your thesis. This is one way of doing it. Another way could be you could just write a paragraph on it. Okay, so whenever you report your data in your findings section, now there's a difference between findings and discussion, right? They're both part of your analysis. In findings, you present the data. In discussion, you interpret it and connect it with your literature review. Okay, I'll repeat that. In your findings section, you're just presenting what you have found in your data. So you will be quoting from your data, you will be talking about your data, but you would not be interpreting it at this stage. In the discussion, you're making sense of that data. You're explaining those findings and you're connecting it with the literature review that you had done earlier on. So what I've done here is I have written my findings according to those codes that I just showed you. I have written, and a presentation of my data, and I have quoted from that as well. I'll give you a second to read it. So I have used one of the participants' own words as well. I have said that as Adnan said, and then I've put his direct words into the quotation marks. So I have explained my findings there. In the next slide, I'm showing you how to report data in discussion. So in your discussion, you may connect it to the academic literature and present an argument. So now you're responding to your research question through an argument that you have developed based on the themes in your data. So you present argument with evidence and explanation. This evidence can be from the data as well as from academic literature. So whatever you say, any claims that you make should be based on your data and your literature review. This is how I wrote the discussion for the findings that I've showed you. So what I'm saying here, my argument is the participants identified caste and religious identity issues in the novel and related them to caste-based and religious discrimination in Pakistan. Some of the participants identified religious issues in the lives of the characters, so now I'm giving evidence from the data. If you see later on, when I've used a reference, Verkaik 2001 wrote about Muslims disliking and abandoning the Indian caste system at the time of partition. Even though the Hindu castes were to some extent abandoned at the time of partition, these participants believed that discrimination on the basis of caste, similar to what is shown in God of Small Things, is experienced in present day. So I have connected my data with the literature review that I had done in my second chapter. So the discussion is a sort of interpretation of the data. I am making an argument and I am giving explanation and support of that argument from my data as well as from the academic literature. So this is how you should be analyzing your data. Another example, I find this a bit simpler. I asked my BS students why did they choose literature as their major. And all of them came up with different responses. They interviewed each other and they came up with certain reasons. Now, I created 4 codes according to our topic. The 4 reasons that I thought would come up a lot in the data. I put it as job opportunities, personal interest, family's choice, and others. If there was something that I hadn't thought of, they could put it under others. 17 students responded. Let's take a look at the coded data. So I've got these 4 codes and I've got the data under those codes. So 10 participants coded it under personal interest, 5 were coded under family choice, and 2 under job opportunities. When they gave this data, I went through it. We were actually doing it in a class, so we all went through it and we came up with findings and discussion. So we wrote our analysis like this. In the findings, I wrote 17 final year students responded to the question about their choice of English literature as a major. The reasons could be divided into 3 main categories, including career opportunities, personal interest, and family choice. Majority of the respondents chose the subject themselves. However, 5 had been told to do so by their family. As one of them said, and I put it in quotation marks, "It was my brother who chose this field for me." 2 participants has chosen because of career options. Now here I am only writing what the data says. I'm not explaining it too much. I'm not interpreting it. And I'm definitely not bringing in any literature review. In the discussion, however, I have included some literature. What I have written in the discussion is, as majority of the students chose their major because of their personal interest, it can be seen that young people are sure about their interests and can choose their careers and path themselves. However, influence of family can still be seen as 5 out of 17 respondents chose the subject due to the families. This can be an influence of the collectivist culture as opposed to individualist that these participants belong to till amend 2020. So I have interpreted that why do these participants still choose their own major because of what their families say, because we live in a collectivist culture as argued in the literature review. Then I explained that career counseling is minimal in our schools and colleges, as there are only 2 out of 17 people who thought about job opportunities while choosing their major, as discussed by Adams 2017. So I have made an argument and I have connected it with my data as well as literature review. Okay. I hope that this was clear. These are some further reading resources that you could use. Elliott's article, Victoria Elliott's article about thinking about coding process and qualitative data analysis is very insightful. I would really advise reading that alongside these others. All right, so that's it. If there are any questions, you can ask.
Thank you so much, madam, for such informative session. And I request all the participants to submit your questions. If you need to ask anything, please feel free. Well, madam, I need to ask something that how do we control a biasness in qualitative research? As you know that there are so many variables which affect the findings or which affect the discussion of our data. So maybe it's religion, our upbringing, or education. So how can we control that biasness in explaining our data?
Since qualitative research is considered very subjective, then there is always going to be that subjective element in our research. But we try to avoid the bias as much as possible. As researchers, we need to be aware of the fact that there is going to be our own bias. The way we choose our topic is going to be based on our own interest, our own inclination. The way we shape our questions, the way we ask our questions will also have some kind of inclination. So what we try to do to avoid that, firstly, when you are preparing a consent form for data collection, you should include only as much information that enables the participant to know about your project, but not give too much of your own views on it. Secondly, when you are asking your interview questions, you shouldn't ask any leading questions. Always ask very neutral, unbiased questions. So your participants are not led on to what you might want to listen to. You can also get your, you should always pilot your instrument so that your first interview can be checked by a supervisor or an examiner or maybe a critical friend so that they can see what kind of questions you have asked and what kind of interpretation you have come up with. Also, like I said, you should get somebody to code a bit of your data to avoid such bias in that stage of your research as well. So we have to be very, very careful at all the different steps of our data analysis.
Yes, I understand. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Nemath is saying, can you explain thematic analysis? Thematic analysis, Nemath, is a method of qualitative data analysis, and it has a number of steps, as I was showing you Braun and Clark's model of thematic analysis. Let me share that slide again. Okay. Let's go back to the model of thematic analysis, and I can show you. Probably the slides were not moving at that point. So this was the Braun and Clark model that I was explaining. So the first thing that you do is you familiarize yourself with the data. Then you come up with some codes. Codes is like naming the data. So you give the data your headings, and then you come up with certain patterns in the data. How are these codes linked with each other? Once you have coded all your transcripts or all your documents, you see what are the patterns within that data. Then you review those themes, define and name them, and then you write about them. This is the process. If you read through the steps after this table in Braun and Clark's article, it's I think after page 82, you would be able to follow it a bit better. Okay. I hope that
Well, we have
answers.
another question.
Yeah.
We have another question. That role of theoretical framework in qualitative data analysis.
In qualitative data analysis, you could use a theoretical framework. It could be a theory that guides your coding. It could be a theory that guides your research questions and your interview guide. So, what is a theoretical framework? It could be a conceptual framework that you have used to define the parameters of your research. So this is what I want to work on. Say, for example, I wanted to work on students' perceptions of citizenship. Now, I have to define citizenship through a theoretical framework, because my understanding of citizenship might be different from Dr. Sana's interpretation of citizenship, or Hajra, your interpretation of citizenship. So um, we have to come up with a theoretical framework so that we can define the parameters of our research. So I defined citizenship from Kogan's framework. Kogan has defined citizenship in terms of identity, rights, and duties. Now, these three elements, identity, rights, and duties, inform my research questions, my interview questions, as well as my data analysis, my coding. So they would be the overarching elements that I would be using in my coding process, as well as my interview questions as well. All right. So it's the guiding principle that guides your whole study when you're using a theoretical framework.
Well, one of our participants is requesting you to share slides. So I don't know if it's possible.
Well, if the video is there, then the slides would be showing as well.
Obviously, there's no need. Okay, thank you.
All right. Do we have any other?
Well, I guess we don't have any other question. Do we have?
I can't see any other questions in the comments.
Okay. So thank you so much, madam, for this informative session and taking out time from your busy schedule. And it was my first interaction with you, and I found it very interactive and very informative. Thank you so much, madam. And I hope we will be in touch later as well. Thank you so much, SMUTA, for organizing and arranging this informative webinar for us. And thank you so much to all of the participants for attending this session. And God bless you. Thank you, madam.
Thank you.